Alright, it's going to be a big day on the Toyota solid axle swap. Last few days I've spent getting the frame painted. Did a self-etching primer, a nice black and clear coat. It's painted, it looks nice, I'm pleased with it. It's currently a Friday after work. I got some help. We're going to try to get this axle under the truck. Not worried about the shocks yet, not worried about the radiator, not worried about throwing the cat in it just yet. We're antsy, we're excited, we want to see this thing get on the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the plastic out of the engine bay from paint. We're going to roll this axle over here and throw the shackles and all 6 bolts in. Probably bolt the tires to it and set it down. Real excited to see how this thing looks and see it sitting on the ground finally. Alright, we just put all 3 bolts in, as you saw. Got them snugged up. I wouldn't say tight, or at least not final torque. I think I'll go ahead and throw the nuts on the bottom of the steering rod so it doesn't flop out for any dumb reason. And like I said, since we're excited, we're going to go ahead and throw the tires on. The brakes won't be on it. I still got to work out the lines and stuff. But we're really wanting to see this thing sitting on the ground, if not outside of this garage. Alright, we haven't thrown the tires on yet. We are currently torquing the U-bolts down. I'm just going to do 90 foot-pounds on that. I think that's sufficient. Before I get the tire on here and I can't reach in as easily, I'm just going to go ahead and do the steering box. Got some grade 8 hardware here to put it in, so I'm going to slap it up there and bolt it in. Alright, we got the tie rod on there, snug down, all the U-bolts are torqued. Got a jack under it, we're going to start picking it up and throw some 35s on it. Got it sitting on the ground. Feels good. Feels really good. A couple months of work. It's nice to see it sitting on the ground on a painted axle and painted springs and painted frame. I can tell you right now, this truck needs a bath bad. Being in the shop, a lot of metal dust, shavings, general debris is just kind of floating around on it. Plus boxes. But we only got three lugs holding on. That's fine for now. It's just sitting here. We will be double checking, you know, tightness on all our bolts before this thing ever hits the street. But really just wanted to see it. It's a nice way to kind of end a Friday afternoon, seeing the truck sitting on the ground. Alright, working on the brakes. I threw the hard line up here, which goes from that fitting right there down to the one welded on the frame. Getting these clips on turned out to be a pain in the butt. I'm basically using a double, like, they're these like compression sort of style clips. They look like this. If I can get it to focus. They have a little bit of a bow in them. And so when they get pressed up under, that bow creates some pressure and keeps the fitting from this brake line from moving up and down. Well, I'm using 2 of them at the moment to hold it in place. And you're supposed to be using like an E-clip on the bottom here, but I don't have any. So technically this is working. It's not right. But it is working for now until I can get my hands on some of those little E-clips. I think they're a little bit hard to find for Toyotas. I'm going to have to dig around a junkyard. But anyhow, on the other end, I made this bracket right here. Took a plate, got a hole in it, made it to the same like kind of oval shape, the same shape as the end of that brake line fitting, and I made a mirror bracket for it for the other side. Not my proudest welds, trying to keep them small so that they fit on the other side. It's just a piece of metal head laying around. Like I said, this is not my favorite setup at the moment, but I'm really trying to just get this thing out of the shop now. I'm not trying to, you know, cut any corners per se. This is plenty strong, will hold the brake lines, will work. Better than some janky setups I've seen before, but not my favorite setup at the moment. I might look into getting an entirely new line here, and that uses some type of banjo fitting onto the back of the caliper instead of it being an additional hard line. It just seems like too many joints that are unnecessary. If you had this thing with like a banjo fitting, the problem with this is it has an inverted flare style, but if you could switch to a different caliper with a banjo fitting, possibly with the Tacoma calipers that came off, this setup might work a little bit better. But this should work anyhow. Enough of me rambling. This is the setup I'm going with. Hard line into my little makeshift bracket. Line runs up, loops around in such a way that it won't get bound up. The shock will probably just barely push against it, and that'll be fine. And up to there. So there's plenty of room. I got plenty of brake line for up and down travel. So I think that's going to be fine. I'm going to go ahead and go on the other side and get it set up. Tomorrow we're really going hard on it and try to get this thing rolled out of here sometime. I'm trying to eliminate the problems I can tonight. Alright, it's the next day. I spent the morning running some errands for the truck. Hit up a junkyard. I found a two-wheel drive Toyota pickup that had a collection of brake line clip stuff. These are the E-clips I didn't have last night. They're supposed to go on one side of this. Instead I ended up using two of the Toyota style clamps. And if you actually compare the Toyota two-wheel drive brake line clamp to the four-wheel drive, it is wider, and I think the four-wheel drive one is wider in the center too. I think that'll actually help. I was finding that these wide four-wheel drive ones were barely staying on underneath this little flange right here. So I'm actually going to try to swap all this stuff over to the two-wheel drive stuff. Narrower clamps, and see if I can get these E-clips on there. I think the fittings will be better. But the bracket down here is working, it's just not properly clipped on. Alright, got the E-clip on one end. I don't know if you can see it, I don't know if it's focusing, but got the clip on the back side, clip on the top, E-clip on the bottom. I like it. Looks nice. Plenty of wiggle room. Just going to repeat it on the other side. Alright, sorry about the background fan noise. It is hot out, it's 95 degrees. I'm trying not to die out in the shop. Alright, so next on the assembly of this truck, I need to get the catalytic converter back in while it's still easy to get to. I have a new gaskets for both ends. The only things I need to do is, if it's clear in the camera frame, I had to cut the bolts off. It's a little bit chewed up right through here. So I'm just going to sand this flat with a grinder and probably wire wheel this a little bit to get both ends ready to go back on. This one ain't too bad. This one had studs with nuts, but all of them are going to get replaced because a couple of the studs got jacked up, so I got new flange head bolts, some new nuts, and a little bit of anti-seize so I can get stuff back apart later. But I'm just going to go ahead and clean this thing up and get it prepared to go back in. I just had an absolute fight with the catalytic converter. That one, the three that go up on the back of the manifold where the the two sides connect together and it goes into the cat, has 3 studs. Well, I was going to check them out, but the 2 are in there so tight, I just put nuts on them and they work fine. The last one, the stud was just absolutely destroyed when I took it apart originally. It didn't stay in there, it came out, but it got destroyed. So I thought the threads inside it were fine over there, but turns out they weren't. I tried getting this M10 in there and just annihilated it. Lucky to get it out and didn't break. But then I just spent the last 40 minutes running a tap through it with an extension just so I could get it all together. But destroyed my tap. Either way, do what it takes to get it done. Tap got it cleaned up. Got the bolt through there. Nut on that one. Nut on the one in the back. And then the 2 bolts to hold the cat on. So it's on. I plugged in the oxygen sensor right there. So catalytic converter's back in. So this thing shouldn't be unruly loud or throw a code now when the thing gets started back up. Next thing I'm going to take a look at is getting the steering shaft in. So of course here's the shaft. This end is going to go to the steering box. This end is going to go inside to the steering column. As I mentioned before, there's a master spline. You can see where it's like a double size one. I know that is on the top of the steering column. So I will have to take this joint off. It's temporarily on there. I'll slip this in from the outside, put this back on, and then spline this into the steering column. I do have some concerns that the edge of this might bump into the wall of the fender. I'm not exactly sure how well it's going to go through there. I've got all these brake lines and stuff. I'm going to have to pull on some of these and see if I can get some space. I don't know if the 1-inch body lift is what's hurting me here or not. We'll see. Let me just get it in there and see what happens. Next update. Got the steering shaft in. It was very difficult. I didn't actually film getting it in there. Having trouble clearing brake lines and stuff up there. But it's in there. All the lock nuts are tight. All the set screws are tight. I made sure in its rotation it's not hitting into those brake lines. Boy, is it close. Kind of have a zip tie holding one of them a little out of the way. Turns just fine. Feels pretty good. It has oil now. So steering, I'm going to call it good for now. I just kind of set the bump stops for now, so that when it turns, you can kind of see the witness mark from the dirt and oil. When it turns, I don't want this plate to like cut into that seal, so I stop it just shy of that. Set this one and the one diagonally opposite from it to stop at the same time, and same thing for this one. So I've got some left and right. I don't actually think it's as far as my other rock crawler I have. It looks okay. I've seen trucks that are worse, but I'm pretty sure that one back there has a lot better steering radius than this one. Plus it's shorter. We'll see. For now this will be fine. This is as many of you guys know, projects like this just do not end. You'll be working on them for a long time. So I'm sure I'll be addressing the steering on it some more, and probably updating some of how that brake hardware is set up, but for now it'll work. It'll get me back on the road. So it's hot out. Heat index says like 109. So next I'm going to put a new radiator in it. I think I'm ready to go ahead and do that. This is the old one, has the shroud on it. This is the tallest version that came with Toyota pickups. I think it's about 22.5 inches tall in the core. But I've got another one in the box, brand new. So I'll pull it out and show you what they look like side by side. This one should be like 1.5 inches or 2 inches shorter core top to bottom, but the mounting hardware or mounting bolt location should all be the same. And I think the shroud shouldn't swap over because it's set up for a taller one. We'll see. I gotta get it out. Sitting side by side. You can see that this one's clearly shorter. What I I don't like about it is the fact that because it's not OEM, it doesn't have little hooks on the back to hang it like this one does. This one you can set in there and it'll hang into some holes on the back side of the core support, and it'll just hang there. You don't have to have any bolts in it immediately. Alright, well, I'll dig out some hardware and throw this one in, throw a couple bolts, I guess, in the top, and see how it looks in the truck. Alright, just tried to fit the radiator in there. I could not get the bolts on the driver's side to fit. This lower one right here is for the shroud, and it's bumping into that back side of that steering box, so I'm going to have to cut that off and try to mount that differently. Plus I'll have to trim the bottom of that shroud off, because this is like 2 inches shorter. The shroud doesn't fit on the bottom half, so I'm just going to cut it flush with the bottom where I can, and I think it'll be fine. Cutoff looks okay, definitely floppy. I don't think there's going to be much I can do about that part. Since this is the mount that was hitting, it's cut off. I also drilled 2 holes that go through the housing. And I'm going to take my zip ties and zip tie it in place right there, and cut that little bit of plastic off, since that mount's no longer going to work. And I'm definitely not going backwards now and putting the old radiator back on. Alright, got the radiator in. After cutting the bottom off, notching for a bolt on the steering box, and kind of doing a zip tie mounting that corner. We also had to clearance behind this cross member. It's kind of hard to see in there. It was bumping underneath down there. You can barely see it. It was bumping in. We had to nip the corners, but fresh bolts. It's in. That's where it needs to be. So now I got to hook up the upper and lower radiator hose, and we're going to hook up the trans lines. Alright, I'm going to try to make a little change to my steering stabilizer mount. This is what I showed in a video of mine when I was mounting it. It's 2 U-bolts, goes through a plate, has a 1/2 inch, what almost looks like a carriage bolt. It's just got this big rounded head on it. Doesn't have any square shank or anything. But it's just a 1/2 inch bolt, fine thread, goes right through it. It looks like it worked okay, except I had concerns that this being the steering shaft running through there, this pushes this end up really high in the air. I didn't find that I could easily run it angled below the steering arm like that. So I was trying to roll it forward, but that puts this end piece and with the other end not in the same plane, which could cause a binding issue. So what I'm going to do to try to solve this is I got this 1 1/4 inch mount kit. These will actually bolt to the steering shafts. What my intention to do is make an entirely new mount out of these for this to go on. So what I plan on doing is drilling a 1/2 inch hole in the back side, dropping a bolt through it, dropping a bolt through the center, being able to weld that here and in the plug hole on the back side. That will, in theory, make it so that the steering shaft doesn't mount this far up off the center. Instead, it'll mount just off of the center of the steering shaft. It'll drop the head of this by probably 2 inches. It should make more sense as I get them together. Either way, when I'm done, I'll have 2 different options for mounting. I think I'm going to like this one far better, but I'll show you what I'm talking about as I get farther. on this steering stabilizer mount. The original bracket was the plate with the U-bolts. As you can see, it would put the eyelet above the shaft. Even if I roll it forward, it's still kind of high. So instead of doing this assembly, what I did was drill that 1/2-inch hole in this clamshell style clamp, and then when you put the bolt in it, which I'm going to weld in, you're going to be dead in line with the center of the shaft, at least wherever the steering stabilizer lands. So it's actually going to end up being over here, closer to there, and that significantly lowers the end of the steering stabilizer. And also, it's getting very close to the bottom of the engine. I'm approaching this AC tensioner pulley, so I'm thinking this is a necessary change. And I also like how up and out of the way it is. I mean, it's barely above the axle. It's tucked out behind this cross member, so I don't think you're going to have any problems. So I've got a bolt already on the table cut to slip into the back of this and weld, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that, and hopefully it'll press in here a little bit. That'd be nice, but I'm going to get it in there. Alright, I don't know how the editing is going to work out, but I had started doing the work on this. I'll probably show it in the video. This is kind of how it's going to look at final assembly. That's the bolt welded through. Sanded it down on the inside, almost can't tell it was there. A little spacer. Then I have a bushing inside of the piece, a washer, and another nut. And this is a stover nut that'll kind of hold its place. But put this on the steering shaft, and this will clamp on the back side. Alright, then over here underneath the truck, we got the trans lines hooked up. One on that side, one right here on this side. They're not flush with the bottom of the frame, but they're looking pretty good. We're hoping to run the power steering lines across the bottom of the radiator. Got about 2.5, 2.25 inches running across. We'll see. Haven't got that far yet. Those are going to be the biggest fight of the day, I think. At least temporarily, we have manual steering. I don't know how much you're supposed to run one of these boxes without fluid in it, but it is hooked up so I can move it in the driveway. But now we're going to throw this steering stabilizer up here. It'll mount it on this end, and then that mount's going to clamp to the crossover steering right over there. Alright, you can see the steering stabilizer mount on the front. I might end up painting this washer later, so it looks a little bit jank being rusty, but you can see how it pulled the point of this down by like 1.5 inches. It would have been very, very close to the bottom of that mount over there. It's nice, high, and tight. These were a little bit of a pain to do. We need to get the socket with the Allen head for the back sides and make it a little bit easier. For now I didn't have one, so we just did it with a regular Allen wrench. But anyhow, it's on there, it looks good. You can also see that the two ends are sort of parallel, this bolt and the one down there, which keeps them from binding up. I think the next thing we're going to do is dig out the shocks and go ahead and throw those on. That band up there. Free them up. Free them up. Alright, next well-needed update. We put about a 1/2 gallon of coolant in it. It's a little bit short still. That'll be fine, we won't run it long. Fan is installed. Power steering belt is unhooked because we haven't actually figured the power steering out yet. The lines are just not going to work very well the way they are. I don't see how to run them and not mess stuff up. Brake pads are in. Brakes are bled. They feel awesome from inside the truck. I already showed you the shocks are on. And the battery is hooked up. So we are going to throw the 35s on, set it back down on the ground, and roll this thing out of the shop. Oh, it ain't too bad. Alright, it's not totally done, but looks pretty good, feels good. Really taking a moment to appreciate the fact it drove out of the shop. I don't want to disappoint anybody who knows anything about off-road vehicles and stuff, but to lift the rear of this, we're temporarily going to go ahead and put U-bolts and blocks in the rear. It's already got an add leaf. I do have intentions to lift the rear properly. The 14-inch shocks that I previously had, I'm still going to run those. I've got some 63-inch Chevy springs sitting here in the yard, so those are going to go in the rear. I've got shocks already. I've got some leaf spring hangers laying around. I'm not sure if I'm going to use them exactly, but I got some old leaf spring hangers sitting back here I can use. So for now, we're temporarily going to just lift it with blocks just to get it level. The mindset is to get it on the road, test and tune the front end, get it acting right, get it where we're comfortable and it works correctly before we start tearing into the rear. Don't change too many things at once. You won't be able to figure out what's not working. So